Truth Talks. Please, I'm excited about the Truth Talks. They are addressing true fellowship and what it means, what true fellowship and corporate worship looks like according to the Bible.
All right. But however, we got to go back to 21. We're going to take a real small trip back to 21, just to the last part. All right. And a connection of the person we met so long ago who picked up 5 smooth stones to go and take on Goliath. The person who ran from Saul throughout all the land of Israel, being chased, constantly followed. That person, we know that David was courageous. He was fearless. He was always ready to go where God needed him to go and always doing what God needed him to do. But if we go back right here to 21:30, we see a completely different David. We saw the first time that David showed these fears when the Ark of the Covenant fell and killed Uaz. David was afraid then. But now we see David again afraid. I'm not pointing this out to say that David is now turned into a coward. He's afraid of the Lord. I'm just showing that David, understanding that him being a king, he still had the reverence and understanding it was something greater. And this time he had got to witness it up close and personal. All right. Even though David had ran from Saul, did all the things in the land, up and down, we seen his bravery. But now we see that after David's testing, censusing the people. That's a long, hard word to roll. See, I got you too. It ain't just me. I don't. How about this? David took a census. David took census. I don't think the ing is supposed to be on there, but we worked it out. Me and Eric, what? Censoring the people. Yeah, just counting them. All right. So we see the day. We see. I had what is that Porky Pig moment where you be like deeba. He censored the folks. So David, we see that David now has a different type of fear on him, a fear of understanding, a fear of that reverence of, hey, I don't think that I should keep pushing my luck. All right. Now we know that David shouldn't push his luck. David has been in more luck pushing situations than one king should allow. But we see that David always maintained a heart for the people. Even when he was out doing what he was doing, even when he's counting people, whatever it was, David always came back to that fear of the Lord and understanding of the reverence or the sovereignty of God. I wanted to point that out really quick because we'll see some people will see these and take it as David is now afraid of God and he's acting in fear. No, David is understanding of God because we know that the fear of the Lord, there it is. I ain't have to say it, ain't one of the ones. We heard it a lot. Is the first step of to getting, and with all thy getting. So we understand that this is the fear that David is showing, not the fear of being afraid. It stuck out because we can hinder on the word fear, and we'll forget to understand to take these people as examples of how we are to fear the Lord in understanding of our good and our bads, our lives. So I didn't want to run past that because right now, once David starts fearing the Lord, he's going to get to business. Now we can get into 22. David's getting into business. David's like, hey, I now have a greater understanding. Not only do I have an understanding, it's time for me to start to get the things together. Why is David just getting things together? Why is he not starting the construction? Because he's not going to build, but this message has already been given, but David still knows his job. So David now, he's going to give charge to Solomon. He's going to tell Solomon some things, right? So in 22, in 30, I want to make sure I read it for you. But David could not go before into inquire for God, for he was afraid because of the sword of the angel. We see that David's fear in 30. That's what I just explained. So now let's roll on to it. Then David said, this is the house of the Lord, because David is now ready to build the house. This is the house of the Lord, and this is the altar to the burnt offering for Israel. So now David is saying, this is where we are going to make our burnt offering. before they had multiple places, because the tribes were split at one point, coming across the river, and then from there they built up this and that camp made it here and this camp. So David is saying, look, this is where God said we are going to put it here. This is the house where the Lord's name is going to be known through all out the land. I explained a little bit why David's hands was covered in blood and why he couldn't build a temple. Because in those times, historically, if any man in charge or in power constructed anything great, if that man had been a warring man, guess what everybody would say? I will take the eye or the jewel of his crown that he has planted in the middle of his kingdom. And they would literally constantly be at war. Make sense? David has blood on his hands. There are people out there that still see David as somebody, as a threat, as someone that would always be constantly fought, right? He's not a man of peace. He wasn't. So there's the blood on his hand. So David noticed, and David commanded to gather. Now, this is another part that I talked a little bit about last week too. In 22:2, and David commanded to gather the strangers. All right. Now, in the Old Testament, when they meant strangers, remember Israel is now a growing nation. It's a nation. So anything outside of Israel is considered a stranger, a sojourner. Remember the laws and the rules written in Deuteronomy? If this person is a stranger and he comes into you, you do X, Y, Z. Well, David has these strangers amongst them. Those would be considered people that weren't the Jews. In modern conversation in New Testament, those would have been the Gentiles. Now I want you to pay attention to what David is doing here. And David commanded to gather together the strangers that were in the land. He did this because of Hebrew law. You couldn't get the Jews, you couldn't put them into slavery or make them work without, they didn't put compulsory labor on each other. But he asked the strangers of that land that were in with them, and he said there were masons, and he brought them stone. And he said, build the house of God. That is a very interesting thing to find right here in the midst of Chronicles. In the Old Testament, when they were writing after they came out, they acknowledged that the temples, that the hands that were built the temple, that hewed the stone, were Gentiles. We see that echoed in the church. Who did Jesus say would build a church? It's going to be on the Gentiles, the people that are not of your nation. So we see those connections here in the Old Testament. And David prepared the iron in abundance, nails for the doors and the gates, and for the joinings, and the brass in abundance. I mean, he's getting it all. He got the cedar that was we heard came in from a couple chapters ago. Now, cedar, and this time wood is very important. We have precious metals and we have wood, because wood now is structure. Remember how important it was that David mentioned, I have my house being built. Why not a house for the Ark of the Covenant? Because people were now constructing they're building their kingdoms up. Assyria is over there building, they're growing, they're getting bigger. They're starting to build infrastructure. So David also acknowledging the fact that Israel needs infrastructure. We see a lot of, the things in the Old Testament. Well, God just said, put it there. Before, these people really didn't have anything to do. The temple was their job. The people was their job, because Israel was supposed to spread this knowledge out. So these things that we see David assigning, it's what Israel was supposed to do. These are the jobs they're supposed to do. We've seen all the priests that was assigned before. Now we see a house built for those priests so that Israel can have a job. Just pointing those things out. All right. So David is getting all the stuff. And in 22, David said to Solomon, my son is young and tender, and the house is to be built must be exceedingly magnificent. Or some of the text may say something, but we are talking about, this isn't going to be just any temple. This is not going to be one hewed with just stone. Most temples were built, they were quick, erected, they would get stonemasons. The stonemason would build them up. They might overlay some of the parts with metal, because remember, gathering all of this gold was one of the things that David was doing through a war conquest. So some of these statues that may have gotten erected, and that's why this statue right here, the 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 lining of the different metals would have been a big thing to understand for the kings. Make sense? So when we see that David is bringing all this stuff in and he's telling Solomon, my son, you are building a temple that is going to be magnificent. The first thing that David thought and the first thing that Solomon probably thought was, wow, we're building a building that's going to stand forever. Because neither one of them, if you're reading the scripture, right, in the order that it's going, neither one of them thought, not one of them said the temple was getting ready to be torn down or destroyed or in a couple of years it's going to be gone. But that was not the temple that God was talking of. We hear the different conversation in the New Testament of the temple that God was talking about, residing in the people. But this is the example of the magnificence that was being built so that the God could reside in here. Again, another type to show the world that this is how magnificent you are. Go ahead.
He was using one, he put the nation of Israel together to be a being for the other nations.
Mm-hmm.
They got infiltrated by the beliefs of other nations as they went along. Therefore, they were punished here and there because they didn't listen to God. But here, this temple here that they're looking at here, and mine says magnificent, famous, and glorious throughout all countries. Yep. In other words, there is not going to be anything like it anywhere else but right here. Okay, and you talk about the cedar wood. Okay, David's house was made of cedar, so God's house had to be made of cedar plus. Okay, and stuff, and then bring them from Lebanon, different countries, bringing them in. So.
Mm-hmm. And the fame and the glory throughout all the countries. When it comes to this building, it's so magnificent and unique that it would stand out amongst any other building would have been built. You know, go ahead.
It's something that had never been seen before.
You know, and if you give me a second and, you know, take a moment for me, when I was studying this, the first thing I thought is the uniqueness of every individual and what lies on inside of each one, the basics of all the beauty and regalia you could think of this. Imagine that's the temple on the inside of you, you know, and how God resides in each one of us. You see, that's what I saw in this. So again, I'm not trying to say, well, let me put my thoughts on it. I'm saying when you read the Chronicles, read them in the spirit so you can see the things that are connected to the scriptures. You know, just a thought. So David charges Solomon. David says, he tells Solomon, build a building and make it magnificent glory so all the other countries around can see it. So David began his preparation. And it says, David prepared abundantly before his death. We're getting to it. We're getting ready to get into that closing the gap. Remember when we started? What was the whole reason to read in Chronicles first? Because we're supposed to be on Kings. And the reason was because it started with David's a great guy and then ended with David's about to die. So we're getting to that David's about to die part. You know, when Bathsheba went to David and said, hey, David, remember that conversation that you had? It's in Kings. Just trust me. I promise. I read ahead a little bit. Am I the only one that read ahead this week? So it's all right. We might get to it because we may have to stop, put a pause here to make the story continue to flow.
About the son, the promise of the son.
He probably right here. He's talking to Solomon. This is Solomon, young and tender. Dave, right. It's a promise. You promised my son. My son. Because at the time, we remember in the lineage, all of David's children were mentioned prior to this. Solomon came after a lot of things that already happened, right? So these sons are still there. Solomon is, as it says, young and tender or inexperienced. Solomon is not the age of a king, but this is the thing that David is putting on his shoulder. Then David called his son Solomon and charged him to build a house for the Lord God of Israel. And David said to Solomon, now we're in 7. David said to Solomon, my son, as for me, it was in my mind to build a house unto the name of the Lord, my God. But the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Thou hast shed blood abundantly, and made great wars. Thou shalt not build a house unto my name, because thou hast shed much blood upon the earth in my sight. That's the reason why David did not build a house. I have the thoughts, the whys, and what. But when you get down to the bare bones, the scriptures say it plain and clear. David, you're not building it because you were a man of war. The blood is on your hands, and I don't want you to build my house. All right, plain and simple. I mean, I don't think he did what God said, but in the end, as I look at the types, in the Bible, and the more I study the different books of the Old Testament and the more I understand the types, I understand that the types were there to show us a glimpse of Christ. But the types weren't there to meant to be held on to be idolized, to be worshiped. You had to see David and his flaws, because if not, you would have said David was perfect. Why do I need Christ? You get these types. So when we talk about Solomon, right? I want you to understand that Solomon's just a type. We're going to find out Solomon doesn't live forever. I'm sorry that I'm ruining the story for y'all. Solomon doesn't do everything that he's supposed to do. Again, I'm sorry I'm ruining the story for y'all. Solomon has a lineage of kings that don't do what they're supposed to do. Sorry, I'm ruining the story for y'all. I mean, I'm not ruining the story, but I'm just telling you, these types that come don't cling on to the type because they're just examples. That's when when I was sitting there in the car and they were going through the book of Hebrews this Sunday. He was explaining just that. Don't hang on to the types. This person was a king and a priest, but if you hang on to him, you will fail. This person was this. So don't hang on to David's mistakes. They're just shadows. What do shadows do when the sun come up? So they're just shadows. Okay?
What do shadows do when the sun comes up?
Yeah.
When you see the shadow.
They shrink. But they shrink.
Oh, okay.
As the sun comes up, as the sun is at its peak and it's over your head.
Right.
All right, here we go. At the sun at the highest point, when it stands up there, if you look down at your feet, your shadow will be.
Okay, I got you. We got you then.
So reduce again the types. When the sun comes up, it's all right. It's all right. Oh no! Hey, look. This is the thing. I tell everybody this. I know I watch a lot of TV. Sometimes crazy things come over my head, so it sounds crazy. So anything that I said crazy, I probably was crazy when I heard it. And I said that don't make no sense. And I took 2 days to figure out why that person said it. So if I'm telling you, it make a lot of sense. In fact, it made so much sense that if you go in them little military books that they tell you don't make sense, sometimes they tell you when the sun is somewhere up there and you looking at it, that's how you can tell where you need. I can tell where you need to go. Look at that. So these are just types. So Solomon said, you're going to build a house for the Lord for the God of Israel. And David said to Solomon, my son, I'm not going to repeat that. All right. But the word of the Lord came to me, much blood. So go to 9. Behold, a son. This is where the prophecy comes in, right? This is where David is saying, it's you, Solomon. You're the one that's going to sit on the throne forever. Again, the prophecy is only veiled. It's only understood this much. But David still knows the greater coming because we know what Jesus said about David. Right? All right. So he's telling Solomon, behold, a son shall be born to thee who shall be a man of rest. Rest meaning peace around him. So in the terms of when we're saying rest, this is the understanding. You're not going to have any wars about you. Things may be going on around you, but you yourself will never have to do anything to put blood on your hands. That does not mean you're not going to be getting busy. It just means you're not going to have to do it. Understand that Solomon was a very intelligent man. He was very wise in his wisdom, and he learned a lot from his father, as we can see, and his mother. Do not forget, we'll get to her. Please do not forget that Bathsheba was definitely, you ever hear like reading a story and somebody only got about maybe 3 or 4 lines. You're like, man, that person only had 3 or 4 lines. But then you go back and you really look at those 3 or 4 lines. You're like, wow, that changed the entire scripture, the entire way of thinking, the entire logic of the text. That's why when you get down to the end of the Bible or the crucifixion, Jesus don't have a lot to say. Don't take a lot of words to change the entire course of history. So don't count Bathsheba out. All right. He said, "You're a man. I will give rest from all your enemies round about you, for his name be solid, and I will give unto Israel in his days." So not only you see that what happens for the king happens for the people. David was a man of war. Every time David went out to fight, guess what happened with the people? They went out to fight too. David went to conquest. Guess what happened? Call up the tribes. It's time to fight. Well, now Solomon is literally getting ready to bathe the kingdom in peace. Now, when I was a junior sailor, one thing I learned about times when there's nothing going on is normally the times when people get in the most trouble. All right. I'm telling you that as a precautionary tale to what we're getting ready to get into, because we're going to roll into the life of Solomon. All right. Solomon was a good king. All right. Some say they don't know. Some say he may have wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. It's debatable amongst theologians. And that's why they say at the end of an Ecclesiastes, Solomon said, "Hey, I've done it all, seen it all. It's just vapors." But Solomon would be what you consider a person that lived life fast and hard. Consider trying to think, because a lot of us we hang out in a same age group, and I'm trying to find that little child stars. That's what Solomon would have been. He would have been the Gary Colemans. He would have been the child star that came into a kingdom at an early age, and he was hitting the whole kingdom. What you talking about, Israel? Like he was out there doing it. That was Solomon. He came into reign at the age of 13, but he did not come into the reign at the age of 13. Solomon has been doing this since he was tender. A lot of times when they say tender, the age is normally about 6, 7. Solomon is literally, you remember how Mary was when she sat at the feet of Jesus to learn? Well, Solomon is at the feet of David. He's learning and he's listening, and he's listening to what his dad say, and he's listening to what his mom say, because we know that his mom has some conversation. So not only is he listening to what his dad say, his mom is listening to what his dad say, and it's you get what I'm saying? All right. This thing getting ready to roll. This train is getting ready to leave the station. Don't do the fast finger to me. Charlie said, "Get to the story." No. All right. So he's telling Solomon, he said, "Look, Israel's going to have quiet. He shall build a house for my name, and it shall be my son, and I will be his father, and I will establish the throne." These are all the things that was told him in prophecy. "Now, my son, the Lord thee will prosper thee and build a house to the Lord thy God, and as he said to thee." And he goes and he tells Solomon, "Only the Lord gives thee wisdom." Check. So Solomon is taking notes. "Only the Lord gives wisdom and understanding, and gives thee charge and concerning Israel, that thou may keepest the law of the Lord thy God. Then thou shalt prosper." Meaning, if you do what you're supposed to do, like I did. No, that's not what he said. If you do what you're supposed to do and follow God's law, you will prosper. All right. "Thou shalt take heed to the fullest the statutes and the judgment with the Lord's charge Moses." Remember, these people are still dealing with the laws of Moses. All right. He charged Moses with the concern of Israel: "Be strong and of good courage. Dread not, nor be dismayed. Now, behold, in my trouble, I prepared a house for the Lord, 100,000 talents of gold." He tells them all the stuff he racked up. Now, when we hear Solomon having so much gold and being the wisest king in all these things, you see where a lot of this wisdom and gold came from to make Solomon who he was. Solomon was blessed by his father. "All the riches that I have, I got from my father." But Solomon wouldn't tell you that. Solomon tell you all these riches and stuff I amassed. Now, he did get more gold, but we see who said right here in whose trouble. All the wars I fought, all the battles I got into was just for this purpose. This is my tithe to what needs to go into it. This is what I'm giving to the kingdom of heaven. This is how I'm moving it forward. This is what I'm putting in, because I know I'm not building it. I'm not constructing the walls. I'm not going to do any of these things because I was told not to. But even though I was told not to do that part, I still can give as much as I can to make sure that when it get built, it's as magnificent as it's going to be. It's going to be the best. So David is saying, I'm giving all of my stuff. That's what he said. In his trouble for his house, for the house of the Lord, he talks about the gold talents, the thousands of silver, the brass, the iron. It's all without weight and abundance. And the stonemasons he got and all the stuff he said he got the workers there. Everything he needed. And David also commanded all, this is 17, 22:17. I want you to take note to this command. Because this, remember when we get into Kings, somebody must have forgot this note. And it said, and David also commanded all the princes of Israel to help Solomon his son, saying, is not the Lord your God with you? And hath he not given you rest on every side? For he hath given the inhabitants of the land into my hand, and the land is subdued before the Lord, before his people. Now set your heart and your soul to seek the Lord your God, and arise therefore and build the sanctuary of the Lord, the temple that we see over there, to bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord and the holy vessels of God into the house that is to be built for the name of the Lord. Got all the stuff. I know I'm not building it. Solomon, you building it. All of my sons, come here. This is Solomon. Solomon is going to do all of this stuff. Do you not trust God? Do you not believe God that this is what he said he's going to do? Solomon is building it. So all of the princes, I guess they all said, yeah, we agree. We agree. So the story should have just went on, the end, happy ending. All of us right now, we get to go to Jerusalem and see the beautiful gold building. I guess I'm on my own because it did not end like that, right? We know. Those that read ahead, right? So in chapter 23, we are going to read chapter 23 because and I'll give you headers from all of the chapters that we talked about. A lot of the ones that we spoke of in certain chapters are the organization. So if you read them, I'll tell you what it is and you can understand it. That's what is organizing. You remember some of the stuff we talked about. So David makes Solomon king after he brings all this stuff in. David has literally created Solomon's kingship. Solomon didn't do anything. Solomon is the king because God said that he would be king. So therefore, David was obedient. Solomon is the king. Now, historically, I went and looked up and seen how much I could find about King Solomon. And throughout the world, King Solomon is, you can go to anybody. They always say that he was the most wisest man that ever lived. They always give the wisest man ever lived. They talk about his riches. They talk about his wives. Everybody refers to Solomon through these things. And when I say this, because a lot of people, when I say, well, how do you know about King Solomon? Oh, they say through history. I said, through what book? And that's exactly what happened. Because the only where you find Solomon throughout history, except for one other place in the hieroglyphics where you find King Solomon's signet, it's etched in the stone, is here in the scriptures. So everybody who knows about King Solomon throughout the world, all the great other empires at that time that spoke of Solomon or spoke of Israel as a nation with their kings, this is where the history comes from. All right. So I always like to put little tidbits out there when people talk about biblical figures as if matter of fact, it's history. You speak of it as if it's history. You know it to be history. So understand it to be history, knowing that it's also going forward. All right. So in 23, the first sentence is David makes Solomon king. Oh, well, in 23, the first sentence is so when David was old and full of his days, he made Solomon his son king over Israel. All right. So in 23, after that one paragraph, 23, the whole thing is about the organization of the Levites. From there on in 24 of that chapter, starting there, it's the duty of the Levites. What they do. A lot of this stuff we talked about earlier. 24 is the organization of the priests. All right? No, chapter 24. Chapter 24. I'm sorry if I'm going too fast. I'm jumping. It's a lot of names, and I look. We don't already been down the name road. Y'all don't want me to start that all over again. No. So 24 is the organization of the priests. When you get to 20 of that same chapter, that's the other sons of Levi. 25 is the organization of the musicians. All right. If you continue on, it talks about all of them. 26 is the gatekeeper. Now, if you take a look at that picture up there, I know it's when you get a chance, look at the doors. Look at the doors, count the doors. You'll understand why the gatekeepers was how they were. You know, and it pressed in, and they had as you went through different gates. You know, I just watched an episode of Chosen. All right, and I went to see the which one was it? The Last Supper, and one of the things was they had the gatekeepers. They were people that would ask you questions as you proceeded to go through it. Somebody, are you ritually clean? Did you have any of this happen to you before you get past this point? Some people had to sit outside the gate. That's why when they talk about being shut out the gates, that was serious business. You couldn't get into the temple to make your sacrifice and get your cleansing. Yeah. Oh, the gate, they were security. So here in 25, we see the gatekeepers. All right. But also in the gatekeepers, see we the keepers of treasurers. If you go to 20, they talk about the keepers of treasurers. Then the officers and judges appointed. And then you go to the officers of the counselor in 27. All right. So we're going to get to 28. Now, again, David is addressing all of these people that he's assembled, his officers. And David assembled all the. Now, can I mention a little bit about the assignment? Doesn't that kind of when Paul is talking about how people are assigned to roles and the roles that they do and the jobs that they're assigned to? Nothing from the Old Testament has changed. Jesus, when he came, he was there to fulfill it. And he gave the message to the disciples to let it be known that it's roles inside of the church, just like it's roles that were inside of the temple. And everybody who remembered how they got to those roles, first, they were either born into lineage. Now we're talking about the Old Testament. Born into lineage. They came in, and as they were born into that lineage may have had a grand number. And they actually, as we talked about last time, cast lots to see who could stand these duties and these shifts. But now we have a modern time where it's free to come in. It's free to do these things, and people are a little on the apprehensive side, as opposed to having people cast lots for the jobs, meaning the jobs were so, not the number of the jobs in abundance, but the people that wanted to do it. And that's the kind of thing that when we see the dedication to the temple, to the work that needs to be done inside. And that's all I got right there. All right, so David assembled all his officers, and David assembled all the princes of Israel, the princes of the tribes and the captains and the companies, ministers to the kings, of course, and the captains over thousands and over hundreds, and the stewards over all the substance and possessions of the king and of the sons and of the officers, and with the mighty men and with all the valiant men unto Jerusalem. Then David the king stood up upon his feet and said, hear me, my brethren, my people. As for me, I had in my heart to build a house of rest for the ark of covenant. David is telling the people now on a grander scale what he's already told his princes, but they came back, and he's already told Solomon. This is what the plan was. As for me, I had a heart to build a house for the rest of the ark and the covenant of the Lord, for the footstool of our God, and had made ready for the building. But God said unto me, thou shalt not build a house for my name, because thou hast been a man of war and hast shed blood. So David is standing in front of his people, telling them that although this house is being built, the honor will not be mine because of my deeds, what I've done. However, the house must get built. That's what he's bringing. He said, howbeit, remember, the Lord has chosen me before all the house of house of my father to be the king over Israel. Remember, God told him, I pulled you up from the sheepfold. David, again, even in his talking to Israel, is saying, I have been pulled up into this as the king, and I'm telling you the things that God wants us to do as people. That's why I brought all the people who make the decisions in the town, the princes, the kings, the everybody. Now this is where it gets. This is where we go into Kings. It should. I don't understand the confusion in the beginning of the book, but I guess it missed this part of the speech, you know, or maybe the chroniclers was like, well, look, let's. I don't think they would just put a speech in there that David said, but this speech is pretty clear. Howbeit the Lord God of Israel chose me before all the house of my fathers to be king over Israel. I have chosen king over Israel forever. He have chosen Judah to be the ruler, and we know that's prophecy, of the house of Judah and the house of my father, and among the sons of my father, like to make me king over all Israel. And all of my sons, for the Lord hath given me many sons. He have chosen Solomon, my son, to sit upon the throne, kingdom of the Lord over Israel. Kingdom of the Lord over Israel. And he said to me, Solomon, thy son, he shall build my house, my courts, for I have chosen him to be my son, and I will be his father. Moreover, I will establish his kingdom forever, if he be constant to do my commandments and my judgment as it is this day. So that's the memo. That's a king's decree right there. Right there in the Chronicles. We should have rolled into first Chronicles. It should have been David passing, Solomon mourns, the coronation of Solomon, kingdom of Israel, does great things, save the world. We're all going to Israel just to visit in our life because we know that that's a spiritual journey, right? But it did not turn out like that. I keep saying that because, you know, as we've seen that they were supposed to be the beacon of light for the rest of the world. I'm going to keep saying this because as we follow this story, we know that Israel ends up going into Babylon. I'm not pointing these things out to say, man, oh, woe is Israel. I'm pointing it out to see that everybody, how we have types all throughout the Testament, how prophets are going to be coming to tell these kings, get your act together. We know that they didn't, but it was for a greater hope. So everything we hear, even here when David inserted Solomon's name, right? Because did the prophecy say Solomon? Help me out here. I mean, this past reading. Did the prophecy mention Solomon by name?
Someone would be forever.
Yeah, it was a lot of stuff that God said that David was like, must be talking about Solomon. It got to be. So David, again, this is not saying that David is doing anything wrong. It's pointing out the progression of the scriptures. So when you read them and you see a quick transfer of, wow, this person was just over here doing XYZ, but now they're there. It's just moving around. Moving around. God's plan is moving around. None of this is a mystery. He put it right here before us. It's moving around. We're going to see as one of the kings is going to be like, hey, you were the king, but I'm going to take the whole kingdom from you, but leave you just a little piece. He's just moving around. All right, so right here we see that David is saying Solomon will be king.
But God told him to be Solomon back in 22.
22. So God did say Solomon. All right, so by Solomon, Solomon's name, David, Solomon, other kings, right? But at the end, it still gets moved around. Focus on the type. You'll miss the direction that God is moving the scriptures.
Also, he said, you know, what you had read there, he said, you know, in 6, and now he said to me, he's talking to David, God's talking to David. He said, I lost my thought. Okay. It is your son Solomon who will build my house and my court, for I have chosen him to be what? My son. And I will be his father. David transferred, you know, God said he's gonna be my son. Okay, and I'm gonna be his father. Transfer.
Again, God said transfer, a type. That doesn't make David the new bad guy or Solomon the new good guy. It's just a type. It's moving. If if I had to kind of simplify it, imagine the anointing, right? It goes, doesn't leave the person, because we know, what did David say about his father when he was chasing him? You better not kill him because the anointing is still on him.
Right.
However, David was the anointed king. The anointed didn't leave. It don't leave David. We see that David's going to grow old and die, but we see that now the story is focused on Solomon, a shift in the understanding of who the story is focused on and what his job was. A lot of times these shifts happen, and if you don't understand that the job that that person was aligned to do, when you see them start to fall, you would think that, man, this is just out of the blue. It's not out of the blue. A lot of the times when you see the going forward, it is you did right and you stayed on the path. You did wrong, it was tore from you and passed to someone else, or you did wrong, you was chastised, and it stayed with you. You're going to see that. You're going to see that a lot in the Book of Kings. I know I'm talking about it as if like, hey, but it's going to happen fast.
Types and shadows throughout the whole entire Old Testament went from, switched. That's the thing, that's the word you use. So
Transferred over.
transferred over. And that happened throughout, but not just in Chronicles and Kings, it happened throughout the whole,
Well, you can go to Jesus on the cross now. What did he say to John? Behold your mother, behold your son. Okay, what he said, I'm not no longer be here, but this here, you could almost put it that way. But God would always pick who's gonna take, who's gonna be in there and be in his place for him. And this is the forever part. Okay, this is forever showing you, they didn't see forever to them was as long as they live, but we see forever as coming eternity.
And that's the point. To get to that understanding of the conversation, we know Solomon didn't live forever. We know that David didn't live forever, but these men knew of forever. They spoke of forever. They spoke of eternity. It may not seem like, oh, that we're going, when they said Abraham's bosom, or they talked, they're speaking of eternity. So it was some who thought, and we hear later on in the New Testament, I mentioned a lot of the New Testament because a lot of this echoes. We hear people say, hey, well, eat, drink, and be merry because there is nothing coming tomorrow in our death. You read in the 16th Psalm, it talks about how he called men liars when they say that there's nothing coming. We understand that Solomon didn't live forever, but the forever they were talking about, they spoke of eternity. Eternity. They spoke of eternity and knowing that salvation had to come because of that eternity.
And God was speaking here, he's speaking of fulfillment in Jesus Christ.
Right.
That's what he's speaking.
Right.
So now they did know lineage wise forever, it would always be through his line. That God is speaking to fulfillment ultimately being in Jesus Christ.
All right.
So if you look at what he says here.
My son.
I think he says it somewhere else too. He says, in verse 7,
Yeah,
it says, I will establish his kingdom forever.
right.
Okay? If he resolute performs my commandment and my ordinance as is done now. And so I think that was kind of said somewhere else in the songs about Jesus Christ. And I think David says that. So God's looking at eternity and they're looking at lineage wise forever. That lineage will always, if you look at this, it's still David's kingdom.
Right.
And if you take that, you go down to the next verse, 8, the very last sentence, and there it says, and leave it as an inheritance of your children after you forever. And so he's given that lineage.
So in 28, David is getting Solomon. Now there, all Israel, the congregation of the Lord, and the audience keep and seeking all, keep and seek for all the commandments of the Lord your God, that ye may possess the good land and leave it for an inheritance for your children after you forever. All right. So like you said, they're thinking a lot of the earthly part, but their mind is also on eternal stuff. When they're saying we're going to be a king forever, they're seeing it as them being on a throne forever, not living forever. I'm saying we know that Solomon didn't live forever. So we know that in these types, in these conversations, in the reading and the studies of scripture, when something is taught past the person, who were they talking about? Who is the coming? Who is the understanding of? You know, a lot of the richness is in the Chronicles and talks about that forward coming. A lot of it is also talked about in Samuel and the Kings. But I started here because these are the people that were writing after coming out of Babylon, getting all the stuff back together. They have a different account than what we have already read in Samuel. And from Samuel, we can go into Kings. We may even make it to Kings. I got some time. A lot of it's not on. So keeping all the commandments that ye may possess the good land, leave it for your kids' inheritance. And thou, Solomon, my son. Now he took it back. Like 2 seconds ago, it was God's son. Now it's my son again. All right, but we know the vernacular, the conversation. And Solomon, my son, know that God thy father. So Solomon, you're my son, but God, he's David is not leaving any of his conversation to chance to the people who are hearing this. Remember, this is an audience. I do not want the audience to mistake that the reason why Solomon is here doing this, he's not in line to be the first child. It's not, Solomon shouldn't have been. He was not the first child. I think Bathsheba wasn't even the first wife. So all of this was different than all of the rest of the kingdom would have done it. In fact, the name Pharaoh, and I just give this little history and lineage when it comes to king, the name Pharaoh had been passed down so long that people actually thought that Pharaoh lived forever, just because they kept giving the same one the same name. They cut their hair the same. They did a little tail as he grew up the same. And eventually somebody would come out and be like, oh, that's the same person. He never died. A lot of times they would keep royalty. Look how they were building Jerusalem. A lot of time they would keep royalty inside. We seen one of the people later on in the story. He got told he couldn't leave Jerusalem. Jerusalem wasn't a box. Jerusalem was a major metropolis. And yet he still had to leave. That was crazy. But what I'm saying is, a lot of kings, you never got to see it. They never left outside their court because they wanted to symbolize living forever. That's why lineage was so important. But we see right here that David has shook his whole lineage up because he did not give the birthright to the first male of the house.
They always approach the king, oh, thy king live forever.
Yes.
They always approach them. The only one that didn't was Daniel.
Right.
When he went into, and they had that handwriting on the wall, because
You know what I'm talking
about. That's how they approach the king. Live forever.
We see kinglyship different here in the U.S. All right, we don't see it. We see it on television. We laugh at the regality of the royal processions and all the things that go on, and you know we don't. A lot of people don't get privy to that except through television. You know, it's just the nature. We didn't grow up in a monarch. However, we did kind of grow up in a monarch, and actually, if you know you grew up in faith or you come into faith, guess what you stepped into? A monarch. It's kingly. Learn the royal precedents because they are important. Because the scriptures are telling you how to conduct and how to act, would you say kingdom behavior, in the court of a king. If you go to I think it's the 23rd proverb, the first thing it tells you is about how to act in the midst of a king. Be careful what you do at a king's table. It's better to put a knife to your throat. It's that important because these are decrees. So when he's telling Solomon, if I continue, and Solomon, thy son, I know the God thy father, and serve him with a perfect heart and a willing mind. For the Lord searcheth all the heart and understand all the imaginations of thought. Like when you really think about it, he's telling Solomon, there is nothing you, my son, can imagine. He knows everything that's in that little heart of yours. But you keep your heart in line with his mind and his will, and you will be fine. You'll be perfectly fine. And he tells him that. If thou seek him, he will be found of thee. But if thou forsake him, he will cast thee off forever. Now we see Solomon, and I'm giving a lot of prequel. When Solomon first takes the reign after David dies, and all the things happen, eventually Solomon goes to seek. He goes out, he goes to different places to prayer. So we see that the instructions that David gave to young Solomon stuck in the first beginning of Kings. All right. And David gave, take heed now, for the Lord have chosen thee to build the house of the sanctuary, to be strong and do it. What's Solomon's job? To build a house. If I had to, you know, when they say, was a person successful in doing what their mission was? When I see Solomon, and I think, man, Solomon, we talk about the things, his wisdom, the exhorts of his life and all that stuff. Solomon gets an A for me. He did exactly what God told him to do. He built one of the best houses that was ever built for the Lord. So beautiful that eventually everybody wanted to come and see it. We'll see that with the Kings. Go ahead.
When you were talking about that earlier, I was thinking, you know, that what David left for Solomon, all of David's life with all of the, you know, people that he conquered, all the wars that he fought, those people turned around and contributed to all of this treasures that David gave to Solomon. So it wasn't just, you know, Israel contributing to this. All these other nations contributed to it. So, I mean, that was, and that, you know, it doesn't say word for word about that, but, you know, it does say that.
Oh yeah, they contributed. David whooped on them good. David whooped on everybody surrounding. And he was like, "Look, we'll take the spoils, and y'all can come in under ban." That's what the whole David beat this person. Then they came under ban, and they paid a treaty. Every time he would whoop somebody, and they would pay the treaty. So this is how the wars went. You lost. One of the movies that I like that kind of date that, and I like the fact that the directors actually did a very deep historical dig on it. When a kingdom will come through, now remember, it's only a few kingdoms out there. They're very small. So Israel, even in its growth, is still a small nation, and there's other nations around it growing too. So when David was whooping on these people, and they would go, the other kingdoms that whooped on other people, well, once I whooped on you, and after you whooped on 10 people and took all their stuff, and I whooped on you, I basically got the 10 tribes that you whooped on and your stuff. And that's how the whoopings went. I mean, that's the best way I explain how David's conquest was going. He was beating on them. And after they lost, they came under ban and they gave tribute to Israel. That's how he was able to go and get some of the strangers to bring them in. They was whooped. But when they was whooped, instead of saying, "We whooped and y'all gonna watch us build this," well, can't really do that. Well, how about this? Here's your contribution to what Israel is doing to make the jewel that the world is going to see. Sure, David, we're with that. We're going to hew the stones. We're going to beat the bricks. We're going to pan the gold to go around the thing. We got you. First of all, you whooped on us, and you could have killed us, but you brought us in. Now, the beauty of what I like right here, too, in this chapter is David is giving Solomon instructions how to build a temple. All previous temples building came from direct, right? God gave it to Moses, and Moses went out there and he did the instruction. So David is now telling Solomon how the temple should be built, what should be in there, because it says David gave Solomon his son the pattern of the porch and the house and thereof the treasuries. He's telling Solomon how to build it, where you should put everything at, what it should be, altars, incense. And David, now I'm all the way down to 19. I kind of skipped over all the stuff that David is doing. He's telling Solomon how to cover go. And all this said David, the Lord, make understanding and writing by his hand upon me, even all the works of the pattern. Meaning God wrote this on me so I could pass it to you. And David said to Solomon's son, be strong. Again, another warning of strength and courage to Solomon. Be strong and of good courage and do it. Fear not, nor be dismayed, for the Lord God, even my God, will be with thee. He will not fail thee nor forsake thee until thou hast finished all the work in the service of the house of the Lord. Again, Solomon's job is strictly to build the house of the Lord. He did that. But in the process, we're gonna learn Solomon didn't always stay in line with the commands. We know that Solomon, he just kind of got to a point where he was who he was. And in peace, he had a lot of freedom. But at the end of the day, and if you look at it, you had to give a grade between A and F. Solomon may have got an F in some of the things in the area did, but what the Lord asked Solomon to do, he did it. He built the house. He built it. It was magnificent. Exactly what Solomon was an obedient kid. He did what his dad told him to do, which was what God told him to do. So Solomon was obedient until he wasn't. And that is the thing I want you to understand about the types. Don't get too attached to them. Hear their stories. Take away from who they are, who the people are. We see this Solomon had it all, ready to go. He had all the riches. He had all the gold. He had workers. He had wisdom. He had people around him. He had the ear of the king in the last days. And I'm gonna tell you, I've learned from a lot of older people. You know why? Because older people love to give you the information that they've gathered throughout the years. Solomon had it. David was 80 years old when he died. Historically, that's around the record, around that time somewhere. He's 80 years old. So Solomon was at his knee through the most of the time where David was in meeting mode. You ever see like the old Master Chiefs or Master, they just in meeting mode. They just going in, getting their information. Yeah, man. They come out the meeting, go kick around, tell the sailors what to do, but they're passing the information about the history of the Navy. David was telling Solomon everything he needed to know. He was making him a watch out. What you got?
There was another distinction here too, when, you know, the instructions, like you said, David told Solomon exactly how to build this. But this information came from God himself. All the instructions on what he wanted, how to build it. And in other kingdoms, you know, kings had their own ideas and they did what they wanted to do. They built it how they wanted to build it. The difference is this wasn't built like that. This wasn't built like David, how David wanted to do it, because that information came from God himself. So that was a big distinction to.
Well, I'm over time. Could wrap it up, take us into King, but I know it's getting late. We'll finish out. The next thing we'll do, just to make it quick and easy, so we can know what to read. 29, focusing on 29:10. That's David's prayer. 10 to 20, and then 20 is making Solomon king. And then we're gonna go back to Kings for a quick second, and then we're gonna jump right into the last little book of Chronicles where it says on 26, it talks about David's reign and everything, and then he died, and then we're gonna roll right into all the love and joy that they got going on in the family of David, the house of David. Any questions that I wrote? I know I'm zooming. I know I'm zooming at the end, but I told you it's gonna come fast. Now I will say, as we get into the Kings, all right, I will be bringing the prophets into the Kings. You don't need to know it. What I will do is make sure that if I am speaking from a specific book, i.e., if I'm saying something from Isaiah, Micah, whoever the prophet is that's speaking to that king at that particular moment, I'll make sure I give it to you so we can all stay on track. I'm not going to leave you behind. But it's going to be I'm going to try to keep the story as linear as possible. So when you read it, you understand why Jonah was like, I'm not going to Nineveh. What I want to go over there for? Them heathens, they don't deserve me to go over there. So we don't think that, I want you to say that Jonah wasn't just being disobedient. Jonah was saying, they haven't been faithful like us. Why should I go over there and warn them about anything? Poor Jonah. So we'll see what Nineveh has going on and how some of the people come from over there and how Israel. Is any questions for me? All right.